Welcome to the Climate Equity Foundation podcast, where we explore the intersection of environmental justice and climate change. Guided by our mission, working for a just clean energy transition, we bring you conversations and stories that spotlight communities, policies, and potential solutions. Hosted by Jeanette Pablo, join us as we work to amplify voices and ideas that drive meaningful change. This podcast series focuses on small island developing states, the most vulnerable countries to climate change, facing threats such as sea level rise, extreme weather events, and coastal erosion. Welcome to the Climate Equity Foundation podcast. I'm Jeanette Pablo, and we're focusing on a recent report, Small Island Developing States, Existential Climate Threats and Pathways to Solutions. This episode spotlights 5 SIDS, Fiji, Tuvalu, Kiribati, Maldives, and Guyana, each with unique challenges and opportunities. Joining me is John Farrell, who led a 10-member team on a capstone project at Columbia University's MS Sustainability Management program. Together, we'll highlight the urgent threats these nations face and the bold, equitable strategies needed to secure their future. All right. So John, how did you become, I know this personally, but I want to share with the audience, how did you become involved in small island developing states?
So the backstory on that, Jeanette, is that um, about 3 years ago, I decided to pursue a degree in sustainability because I was really fascinated by climate change and I wanted to understand it. I really didn't have a science background and I really wanted to understand what was going on.
Mhm.
Uh, and in the course of those studies, um, every student going through the master's program has to do a capstone project, which is basically a small team of students who are also finishing the program, partnered with an organization like Climate Equity Foundation, and pursue a project together. And we're offered several projects to choose from. And I chose the Small Island Developing States or SIDS, because I was really fascinated in my studies at sea level rise.
Mm.
And the most fascinating thing I found is that most people I speak to don't know what it is.
Right.
And I live on the coast, which is really, to me, just ironic. So the project seemed very interesting because as we'll talk about, these countries and these people are threatened uh, substantially by climate change and by sea level rise. So that's why I chose that. And also, there's a personal aspect, which we've talked about before, and that is that living on the coast here in the Northeast, I was at the time living on a barrier island when Superstorm Sandy hit the New York metro area, and my house and my family was impacted for weeks
Mhm.
because we literally our home was flooded. So I really know what it's like to have inundation of a place you live and the loss of that place. And so it really was a personal aspect to me as well. So those are really the kind of like
Yeah.
my basis for getting involved and being interested in this.
Well, the origin stories are always very interesting. And I think it's so important for people to understand why people choose a particular path or choose a project like this. Because as you say, it's not particularly well known. And even I would say in sort of the general climate organizations and arena. So you've sort of already told us about why you chose the project. Do you want to talk a little bit about the project itself and the team that you worked with?
Yeah, so we were 11 students in total, all finishing the master's program at Columbia, and we shared an interest in SIDS. We came from all different parts of the world and all different perspectives, but we shared that interest in really trying to figure this out. I mean, it's an enormous challenge. A little bit on that was the team, and I ended up having the project lead role, which was really just coordinating and leading the team. But we focused on essentially the scope, which was 5 of the nations involved, and then we looked at through a desk sort of research. We looked at academic information, news information, and policy information from those 5 countries. We then did interviews of 26 people who live in those countries, and they came from all different walks of life. And then lastly, we held our own workshop where we compared our research, our interviews, and looked for themes, and not just themes of sea level rise was clearly a theme, but there are other themes that are challenging issues that relate to sea level rise or can be caused by sea level rise, in addition to just the fact of that phenomena. And then we tried to find pathways in terms of, so where do you go with this? What are some of the ways in which you can solve this? And are there commonalities across these five countries?
You were talking about the team. Could you talk a little bit more about the team? You were the leader and you did a great job. The team was incredibly fantastic, and I'd love for you to say a few words.
As I was saying, we literally came from every continent. We had people on the team from South America, people on the team from Asia, people on the team from North America, Europe, and um, so we were a very diverse team.
Hmm.
And um, and not only just geographically, but just where we were in our life,
Uh,
and what and how we thought about climate change, and in this case, the issue of SIDS. And so the other thing about a program like this is everybody has a different background in terms of their undergraduate work, and many of us have been working. So what a diverse team.
yeah,
But when it came to doing the work, we really got very good at our um, our approach, the methodology, getting the work done, doing the interviews. And as you saw when we had our updates with you, we were all really, so engaged, and really compared to all the other things going on in our life at the time, because we all have families and jobs, and we were all so um, engaged and just loving the project.
yeah. You all were great to work with, and the inspiration and the energy levels. I always look forward to our meetings. Um, so what do you want to talk a little bit about the five island states and how they related, or what you all learned that was particularly important?
Yeah. So the five island states were Fiji, Kiribati, Tuvalu, the Maldives, and then Guyana in South America, which actually one of our team members was from.
Oh,
And honestly, you know, they all shared this same challenge of sea level rise,
mm,
but that's kind of where it ended in terms of commonality. And the commonalities were really varied. For example, there were really very different levels of knowledge and awareness in each of these countries based on the way in which the countries approached. For example, some countries really did not share with the public the sea level rise issue because they really weren't convinced it's happening.
oh,
This country has monsoons, has all sorts of other climate events, and they felt like which kind of mask the sea level rise,
uh-huh,
if you can imagine. So versus other countries, there was heightened awareness, and in one case, a country was looking at working with another large country, Australia, about moving people, and it
mhm.
was very common awareness in the population. So that was probably the biggest variable, believe it or not.
Oh,
And it really shows you how important it is to have connection from like strategy to execution to getting things done, right? Um, some of the other differences were just simple geology and terrain. Some of these islands are mountainous, and some of these islands are 1 or 2 meters in actual height, and as the most, they're flat and they're really threatened by sea level rise. And then I think, the other factor is just economics. Some of these countries have a lot of tourism, and so the economy is thriving with the tourists, while others are not. So, really, sea level rise is the common thread, and as to being a small island developing state, but they're so varied, which really makes the solutions difficult.
yeah. So can you talk about your project identified 7 challenges? Could
Mhm.
you talk about that? I thought that was
Yeah.
particularly impactful.
Yeah. So, we basically And the challenges, we've a little bit alluded to a little bit in our conversation, but obviously the big one is climate change and sea level rise. That's the headline. But the other challenges included things like water shortage,
Mhm.
the actual supply of water in these countries on these islands because of the inundation of the salt water. The fresh water was depleted, and also just the infrastructure. A third topic is just urban infrastructure. The infrastructure and the architecture had not anticipated these changes to the sea level rise. And so, um, people are flocking to the urban centers for jobs, and the urban centers are right on the shore. And there's really no place for those to grow. And the infrastructure of roadways, airports, all the things that go along with, a modern society are very challenging. A fourth one is just food insecurity.
Ah,
Back to the water shortage and back to the advancing sea level, the agriculture and just climate change um, in general, with changes to precipitation and temperature, are impacting agricultural trends, agricultural capabilities. Um, and then, another big one is, which we mentioned already, is this awareness and, education.
mhm.
That is another issue. And, how do you go about articulating this to the population? Because it's a real threat to their very existence. And then lastly was what I'll call like human capital, having the expertise in each country to actually think through the challenge and then think through how do we get through it economically with all of our people. What's the answer and what are some of the options? So those were the seven, sort of
Yeah.
um, connected yet specific issues that these countries were faced with or
Yeah.
are faced with.
Yeah, all severe, very severe impacts with that situation. So what would you say are the key takeaways from the report? Like for this audience, how would you summarize like what's the super important takeaways that could make a big difference?
So much of it is about the message. I think that um, we all, whether we live in a SIDS or not, there are 70 million people who live across these countries, 70 million people. That is more than many nation states that we talk about every day. And these people are on the front line. Like they are seeing the worst and having the biggest impact of climate change. But I think that we are behind them, meaning that it's coming, it will be to us as well. Most countries, including the United States, large population centers are on the coast. And so I think it's a message about the severity, but also a message about unity. One of the things we talked about in the report is that, these 70 million people are contributing less than 1% to emissions, yet they are having the worst impact of climate change. So climate change is more of a global issue that we all need to unify and work on together. So I think those are some of the key takeaways for me, and just also, as we've talked about here, is how complex it is. It's how there are so many issues that connect, perhaps caused by or are adjacent to the sea level rise issue, but they all amplify each other. And so you need to be really strategic and you need to be really focused on execution to really make a difference.
Thank you. So is there anything else you would like to share about your experience with the Capstone project or the report?
Um, the power of being on the ground. And what I mean by that is, we did these 26 interviews, but these were with people who live there. And so the greatest insight for me came from speaking to these people who live in these countries. Or we spoke to also some professors and some researchers from outside of the area, but focus on the area. And so I think there's something to be said for on the ground insight. Um, because it's ever changing and because you really gain the perspective of the people who are living through the situation that way.
Thank you. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, and I really enjoyed our project, the Capstone project, and I wish you great success in your future endeavors, and please
Thank
stay in
you.
touch.
Thanks, Jeanette. You too. Have a great day, and thank you so much for allowing me to participate.
Thank you for joining us for the Small Island Developing States podcast series, brought to you by the Climate Equity Foundation. We hope these conversations have shed light on the unique challenges and inspiring resilience of these communities in the face of climate change. Together, we can work toward a just, sustainable future for all. Stay connected with the Climate Equity Foundation for more stories and solutions at the intersection of environmental justice and climate action. Thank you.